Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha. Thank you. Girivardhari Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Padavarajakatara Astatara Satahi Savanga Shila Asa Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anajagori Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Govardhana Ki Jai. Shri Shri Krishna Balaram Logiraj Lona Shingadev Ki Jai. Shri Shri Gaurnitai Ki Jai. Nitya Gauri Premanandi. All glories to these humble devotees. All glories to these humble devotees. All glories to these humble devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to this morning's Srimad Bhagavatam class. I apologize about my feet sticking out like this. It's called age. You can't you can't fold the legs the way that you want to anymore. So we're reading from the third canto, and we're in the 26th chapter entitled Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. So today, that's odd. That marker was on 10. I think Chitamrita Prabhu did 11 yesterday, didn't he? Yeah, those who were here, yeah. So today, according to Daksha's schedule, I'm covering 3 verses. So that's verse 12, 13 and 14. So for verse 12 and 13, there's no purport, so I will just myself read the Sanskrit and the English translation, and then when we get to verse 14, we'll all do that, we'll all chant that together. Okay, so here is text number 12. Mahabhutani panchaiva burapognir marunnabha tanmatrani chatavanti ganda dini matani me. And the translation is, there are 5 gross elements, namely earth, water, fire, air, and ether. There are also 5 subtle elements, smell, taste, color, touch, and sound. And then number 13, Indriyani dasha strotram tvagdrig rasanana sikkaha vakkaro charano medram payurdashama uchate. And the translation is, the senses for acquiring knowledge and the organs for action, number 10, namely the auditory sense, the sense of taste, the tactile sense, the sense of sight, the sense of smell, the active organ for speaking, the active organs for working, and those for traveling, generating, and evacuating. Right, so now we come to text number 14. Okay, you can all see that up there. So, okay, here we go. Please repeat. Manu buddhir ahankarash chitta mityantaratmakam chaturda lakshyate bedo vritya lakshana rupaya. Manu buddhir ahankarash chitta mityantaratmakam chaturda lakshyate bedo vritya lakshana rupaya. Mano buddhir ahankarash chitta mityantaratmakam chaturda lakshyate bedo vritya lakshana rupaya. Somebody chant. Okay, any of our ladies want to lead the chanting? Anyone? It's quite an easy one. Oh, okay, that's all right. Okay, here we go. Synonyms. All right, please repeat. Mana, the mind. Buddhi, intelligence. Ahankara, ego. Chittam, consciousness. Iti, thus. Anta atmakam, the internal subtle senses. Chaturda, having 4 aspects. Lakshyate, is observed. Beda, the distinction. Vritya, by their functions. Lakshana rupaya, representing different characteristics. Okay, and here we go, the translation. The internal subtle senses are experienced as having 4 aspects in the shape of mind, intelligence, ego, and contaminated consciousness. Distinctions between them can be made only by different functions, since they represent different characteristics. Right, translation, please repeat. The internal subtle senses are experienced as having four aspects in the shape of mind, intelligence, ego, and contaminated consciousness. Distinctions between them can be made only by different functions, since they represent different characteristics. Jai. Okay, and here's Srila Prabhupada's purport. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. The four internal senses or subtle senses described herein are defined by different characteristics. When pure consciousness is polluted by material contamination and when identification with the body becomes prominent, one is said to be situated under false ego. Consciousness is the function of the soul, and therefore behind consciousness there is soul. Consciousness polluted by material contamination is called ahankara. Okay, Om Gyatim Randasya Ganandana Shalakara Chakshurun Militam Nina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Bistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamayam Darati Swapadantikam Naranayam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Naratamam Devim Saraswatim Dasam Tatrajam Udirayat Nashta Prayesh Vabhadrishu Nityam Bhagavate Sevayat Bhagavatuttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Okay, so I humbly ask for the blessings of the Vaishnavas and devotees that I may give a class that is pleasing to our lordships, to Srila Prabhupada and our pastacharyas, and also to the devotees. Hare Krishna. Jai Govinda. Okay, so so at the start of this chapter, right, Lord Kapila Dev, he says to his mother that he's going to describe the various categories of the Absolute Truth because such knowledge cuts attachment to the material world. So first up, I want to just reflect a little bit about the importance of this kind of knowledge that we're covering in these chapters. Right, so yes, going back to shloka number 1 in this chapter, in his purport, Srila Prabhupada says, Sankhya philosophy, that means detailed knowledge, philosophy of detailed knowledge. Sankhya philosophy is especially meant for persons who are conditioned by this material world. Anyone here conditioned by the material world? Yes. Okay. By such analytical study of this knowledge, one becomes free from the modes of material nature. Jai. Okay, then in shloka number 2 of this chapter, Srila Prabhupada says, Atma Darshanam means to see oneself by knowledge. Therefore, when one is free from the false ego through the cultivation of real knowledge, then he can see himself, right? And that is the ultimate necessity of human life. So the pursuit of this philosophical process called Sankhya, it is called knowledge. Right? This is called knowledge, and it is referred to as self-revelation. Right? Is anyone feeling that it's a little bit muggy in here? I'm wondering if we can put the fans on. Do you think that will disturb anything? Can we give it a go? Beg your pardon? Oh yeah, maybe the door? Yeah. Well, what's the general experience? Does it work if we have the fan on during class? Or yeah? It is noisy or it's not noisy? Okay. Maybe we should get like a little standing fan for the speaker for summer, because summer is coming up. Okay, so now, so Lord Kapila Dev, so he's teaching his mother, Devahuti, this Sankhya philosophy, right? Especially throughout these chapters 25 to 32 of this chapter. And this means that Lord Kapila Dev, who is also sometimes referred to just as Kapila, and sometimes Srila Prabhupada says Kapila Muni, right? It's the same personality. So he's giving his mother detailed information about the living entities and how they're situated within the material energy, right? So now the Nirukti, right? We know the Nirukti is the Vedic Sanskrit dictionary. So according to the Nirukti, Sankhya means that philosophy that describes matters in detail, right? And in chapter 25, text 31, Maitreya Muni has stated that Sankhya, it's actually the combination of devotional service and mystic realization, right, if it is received properly through the proper parampara. Also in chapter 33 in this canto, which we haven't quite got to yet, the Sankhya system of knowledge is further described as the background of liberation, right? Because if a living being understands the basics of Sankhya, then he is elevated to the platform of devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, right? Even within this material world. Now, as we can see up on the screen here today, Srila Prabhupada is drawing our attention to the fact that when Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, he was also giving this very detailed explanation of the jiva, the spiritual jiva being situated within the material energy and the difficulties that the jiva has to overcome. And he was giving that knowledge for the purpose of bringing Arjuna to the platform of self-realization. Now, right. So in the verses that we're covering today, right, Lord Kapila Dev, so he is defining the material elements, the organs, and the internal senses, which total 24, that cover the pure spiritual soul when the soul is forced to come here into the material cosmos and take birth. And of the 3 verses that we've covered today, right, Srila Prabhupada has chosen to add a purport to this number 14, which is focusing on the 4 aspects of the internal senses, also described as the subtle senses. Right? And we learn from Kapila Muni in the verse that one can distinguish between these different subtle material elements according to their functions. Right? So, now, according to Srila Prabhupada's various purports, Prabhupada says that the mind performs the function of thinking, feeling, and willing. Somebody, could you please grab my bag behind me? I'm coughing because I'm a bit... Right. Just put it here. I might have to have a coffee. Thank you. So the mind thinks, feels, and wills. The intelligence is described as the discriminating power to understand an object. Also, the intelligence helps the senses in their decision making. Our sense of ego, right, that means our sense of identity. This acts as the individual's rudder. It's like a rudder, right, because it's kind of like the guiding principle that determines how the jiva perceives himself or itself, and thereby the jiva will shape their own consciousness, and consequently they will shape their own sense of direction in life according to their sense of identity. And then contaminated consciousness, this is the element that ensnares the illusioned living being to remain in the material world, through the effects of their own sinful thoughts and behavior also. So you'll have to excuse me 1 second. Somebody open this for me. I'm so sorry. Can you please open that? I just have to have something for my throat because I'm hot. It's making my throat dry up. So, subtle material phenomena. So this refers to every single living being, right? It is not that only human beings have a material mind, a material intelligence, and a material sense of ego. Thank you. Okay, so every single living being has a materially polluted mind, a materially polluted intelligence, and a sense of ego, right? So it is not that only human beings have this, nor is it that only what we call higher order species like the mammals have this. No, every single living being has this. So even these tiny germs and bacteria, right, that we can see under a microscope, they have their own sense of false identity, their own sense of false ego, and that is supported by their materially polluted mind and their materially polluted intelligence. Right? So this is actually something that today's scientists, they don't have have any knowledge of this. Even though members of today's scientific communities, they are able to perceive these really, really tiny microorganisms, such as bacteria and protozoa. Bacteria and protozoa, they are living, they are moving, they are performing their own functions. And today, with our powerful microscopes, scientists can see this with their, with all their equipment. But still, they are debating whether these tiny creatures actually possess consciousness. So, and the very tiniest of these creatures, they're called archean microorganisms. They can be as tiny as 200. Their bodies can be as tiny as 200 nanometers in size. Does anyone know what a nanometer is? I'm sure some of you have heard of this. Right, okay, so we know a meter is about this long, right, 1 meter. So 1 nanometer is 1 billionth of this length, right? And some of these tiniest microorganisms called archean organisms, they can be as tiny as just 200 nanometers. So it's very, very tiny, right? And these archean organisms, they live inside our gastrointestinal tracts, and they perform all sorts of functions. So the microbiologists, they're able to see these tiny creatures, right, how they live, what they are doing, how they are interacting, but still, the bulk of the scientific community today is doubting whether they actually possess consciousness, whether they have conscious volition, and whether they are sentient. Right? And, in one sense, it makes sense that today's empirical scientists are questioning in this way because they do not adhere to Vedic knowledge. Right? They are not studying the Vedic scriptures, or they may not take them seriously. Right? Specifically, teachings such as these that we call Sankhya philosophy. So, this is actually one reason why why Vaishnava devotees who are inclined towards scholarly activities, they should actually be publishing, as much as is possible to try and teach the sciences that are coming out of the Vedas. But those who are bereft of Vedic knowledge and Vedic wisdom, at best, they will be able to give a kind of a stunted explanation, a stunted knowledge on the cause and effect within the material universe, right? Specifically, how any living organism is truly interacting with their material environment. Now, unfortunately, because of the position of authority that empirical science holds today, this is within mainstream global, the mainstream global scientific community. Because of this very, very stronghold, it's a stronghold that the empiricists have on knowledge today. Because of this scriptural knowledge, such as our Shastras, generally it is not even considered as offering a plausible explanation about the origins of life or the origins of the universe. Today, this is, in these chapters, this is exactly what Lord Kapila Dev is speaking about. So whatever information is contained within the Vedas, in fact, we could say within any scripture, right, by default, it is considered as being incompatible, right, with empirical scientific investigations, or at least, at the very least, as being less rigorous than what can be produced through the empirical research process. And in the worst case scenario, as Srila Prabhupada comments a number of times, he says that they think it's just mythology. And mythology just means, well, that is somebody's imagination. Somebody thousands of years ago had a very good imagination. Right, and that means that Shastric knowledge, such as Lord Kapila Dev's Sankhya teachings, they are not welcome within science departments of contemporary higher education institutions, right? At least not within those science departments who are trying to establish the causal factors within the material energy. And hey, that is exactly, that is one of the topics that we come across very, very often in Srimad Bhagavatam, even in the Bhagavad Gita. So this phenomenon that I'm talking about now, right, as I was saying, it refers to mainstream, predominantly Western societies in which empirical data collecting and data processing, really, it's really glorified in this day and age. It's even deified as constituting, the perhaps the only. I mean, many people think like this, that it is the only trustworthy way to get accurate knowledge on anything. But of course, the Vedas refute this in so many ways with so many very, very good logical explanations. Now, as Dr. Kishori and I were discussing here last time I spoke on science in this classroom, there are some scientists today, who we could say, they are above the general, more closed-minded scientists. So we'll call them the more enlightened scientists. So there is a collection of these types of scientists who are open to information outside of, just their own research laboratories. And I want to give a solid example of this phenomena that is actually happening within today's mainstream scientific communities. And of course, I'm going to be looking at intelligent design theory. Right. Has anyone heard of ID theory, intelligent design? Okay. Ram Prasad Prabhu. Yes, so Ram Prasad Prabhu actually contributed to a book publication. That was it on intelligent design, or it was specifically on? Darwin revisited. So it was looking at Darwin's theory of evolution. Yeah. Beg your pardon? And its shortcomings. Oh, definitely. Well, there's very, very many of those. So this concept of intelligent design, these more enlightened scientists around the world, who are still in the minority, but there is a good collection of them. They have been trying to present a scientific explanation of creationism. And so at the moment, or for the past 2 decades, they have been calling this intelligent design theory. They have to add theory on the end, or otherwise nobody will listen to it. So intelligent design theory. So our situation at the moment is that currently there are no classrooms in public schools or in universities around the world, right, who will even consider intelligent design theory as being a possible scientific explanation about the origins of life and the origins of the universe. Now, a lot of this came about because something happened in America about 25 years ago, right? So 25 years ago in America, right, these enlightened scientists, they were, as I was saying, they were trying to get intelligent design accepted as a possibility for the origins of life in the universe. But immediately they came up against so much opposition, right, from the main body of scientists, that the empirical scientists, that many of these really good scientists, they got fired from their positions. They were banned from ever working again in their fields of science, simply because they suggested that, hey, why don't we look at intelligent design theory? Because there is actually evidence in nature, in living organisms, that there is an intelligent design there. So this, when this happened, this made national headlines in America. It went to court cases. It was such a big deal. And I think the ramifications of that is that, pretty much, in our what we call our first world countries around the world, you will not find any fragment of creationism or intelligent design even being mentioned in science classrooms that are looking at these sorts of things. So, as we know today, the most popular and the most used theory of how life began. You know, it's pretty much resting on Darwin's theory of natural selection, which has somehow led into the evolutionary perspective. And then, then you have the physicists who are very, very stuck on this theory called the Big Bang theory, which is so unscientific. It's not funny. The Big Bang theory says, well, all of a sudden there was a Big Bang, and then you had the universes. You know, these are today's top scientists saying this. What is going on? Anyway, the Big Bang theory has been the most popular, or the foremost theory on the origins of the universe amongst the empirical scientists for about 100 years. This is the sad situation of our science and physics departments. So now this intelligent design proposal, right, it is actually based on simple scientific observations. Anyone can observe this, right? You don't even have to be a scientist, right? And these more enlightened scientists who are still trying to, you know, get this to move forward, they are calling it something called irreducible complexity. Now, I'm guessing you may not have heard of that if you have. Most of you haven't heard of intelligent design. So irreducible complexity works like this. That if you really look at both animate and inanimate objects, right? So if you're looking in a microscope at a human cell, right, you can see that the structures within the human cell, or say if you're looking at the atomic or the molecular structure of gross matter, there also you can see that the structures, they are so complex that you cannot reduce these structures and still have these entities somehow generate and develop and produce more structures to move towards life as we know it today. Right, so I mean, if anybody looks at these entities, you know, and admits, well, okay, you know, there is really, really sophisticated structures there that you cannot actually reduce further in order for those systems to function. That means that you don't have evolution anymore, because the whole thinking with the evolutionary teachings today is that originally you had this little, you know, take the human cell. They see the human, they used to see, like back in Darwin's day, they saw the human cell as being this little blob. A little blob, you know, sort of floating around in mud. I mean, no one knows where the mud came from, of course, but that's beside the point. And at some point, this little blob developed into a more complex structure, and then at some point you got consciousness. Right. So this is, you know, this is a very popular way of thinking. So, you know, along comes these more enlightened scientists, and they say, hey, look at this, we have these irreducibly complex structures, you cannot bring them back to these like blob-like entities. So that means, well, you don't have evolution according to Darwin's theory. So, yeah, so I don't know if any of you, if you understand what I mean by this irreducible complexity. Yeah, it's a little bit like when these scientists are trying to explain this, they're saying that they give the example of a mousetrap, you know, which isn't so nice for Vaishnavas, but they say, okay, just take a normal little mousetrap, the old-fashioned ones, right? You have a little board, you have a spring that catches the mouse, you have a hook, and then you have a little platform where you put the cheese on. Right, so if you remove even one of those parts of that mousetrap, then the whole thing isn't going to work. So this is the scientific argument that these more enlightened scientists are trying to propose in order to say that we have to accept the fact that there is intelligent design both within animate and inanimate objects. And hey, that means if you have intelligent design, you have to have an intelligent designer. Right, so this is, as I was saying, this is an approach to creationism that is a more sort of scientific way of explaining things. Now, yes, so just finishing off on that point, right, back in Charles Darwin's day, 150 years ago, most scientists thought that the human cell was like this jelly-like blob, and they thought that, well, it may be made up of protoplasm. What was it? They thought protoplasm and some other compound, but and so back in those days, Darwin, he was conjecturing and establishing his thinking. But today, right, with our super powerful microscopes and all our computer software, today most scientists around the world agree that the cell, the human cell, it is actually more complex than a large city. Right? Now, I have seen the video footage when they recreate the inside of a cell that is actually happening. I mean, it is absolutely phenomenal. There is so much action going on there, information being transferred, things being transported, being stored, being compartmentalized. All this is going on within the human cell. So what this means is, that today, actually, scientific exploration is actually turning up evidence that supports what the Vedas have been saying all along, right, about the foundations of life and about the foundations of our universe. And yes, that is that there is definitely intelligent design there, and that means that you have to have an intelligent designer, right? So yes, this is actually what's happening. But the problem is that materially focused scientists, right, just like all human beings who are conditioned by the material energy, they are actually fearful of taking big steps in knowledge, or what to them is a big step. So generally they will not acknowledge intelligent design that points towards an intelligent designer. And most of them today, unfortunately, they still cling to this primitive idea that consciousness is somehow a byproduct of gross organic matter. And Srila Prabhupada speaks so much about this, that this is absolutely false. I thought, right, that's our Vedic sciences. Okay, we'll just move forward because I don't want to run out of time. So now we know that Krishna himself, he describes his own separated material energies. Right, and I thought we could chant this shloka in unison. Right, this is quite a well-known shloka. It's chapter 7, text 4. Okay, shall we chant it together while we've got it up there? Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Bhumirapo nalovyayo kamano buddharevacha ahankara iti yamme bina prakritirastara. The translation is earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Altogether, these constitute my separated material energies. So this is, pretty much the same teaching that Lord Kapila Dev is giving to his mother. Now, the word separated material energies in this shloka, right, Srila Prabhupada explains in his purport. He says this material world, right, it is a reflection of the real life in the spiritual world. And therefore, it is described as separated energy. And the word bina, that means separated. Now, a little bit further on in Srila Prabhupada's purport to this shloka, he says the elements of the mind, the intelligence, and false ego, they are neglected by the materialists. Now, these happen to be the subtle elements also that Lord Kapila Dev is mentioning today. And the materialists who are neglecting these subtle elements, well, that includes our empirical scientists, right? So today in the universities, we have this thing called the hard sciences. Hard sciences are things like maths and astronomy and chemistry, geography. And the scientists who are working within these fields, they, for the most part, they are pretty much in gross ignorance about the constitution and the role that these subtle material elements play. Right? So many of them are even skeptical about this thing that they call cognitive sciences in psychology. Right? The cognitive sciences deal with mental processes. The reason why these researchers are so much at a loss when it comes to the subtle material energy is because, right, subtle matter is not able to be controlled in the same way that gross matter is able to be controlled by today's researchers. Right? And if something cannot be controlled, that means it cannot be manipulated for the sake of experimentation. Right? And that means that phenomena, subtle material phenomena, yes, they are generally frowned upon, or they are ignored by many of today's scientists, unfortunately. So, yes, because of the bulk of empirical science, scientists will not take the Vedas seriously. They do not understand how subtle matter interacts with gross matter. But, this Sankhya philosophy that we are studying at the moment, this confirms that subtle material elements are just as important as gross material elements when it comes to understanding the material energy in its entirety and how the spiritual jiva becomes situated within that energy. Here's another great shloka. I thought we'd chant this one together as well, since we've got it up there. Okay, everyone together in unison. Jai. 1, 2, 3. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Imam Vivasvate Yogam Praktavana Hamavyayam Vivasvanmanave Praha Maurikshvakave Bravit. Thank you very much. Wonderful. So, the translation, right, we have it up there on the board. The personality of Godhead said, Lord Sri Krishna said, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god Vivasvan, and Vivasvan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to Ikshvaku. So, this shloka confirms, Krishna is confirming to Arjuna that this science of the Bhagavad Gita, which includes Sankhya teachings, it is imperishable. It cannot be destroyed. It means it existed before the manifestation of this material world, and it will continue to exist after this material universe perishes. It is authoritative and it is pure. And this means that it constitutes the topmost teachings about the material cosmos to be found anywhere at any time. Now, in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna also says to his friend Uddhava that in the human form of life, those who are self-controlled and expert in the spiritual science of Sankhya, they can directly see me along with all of my potencies. Right? So we can understand that this, more scientific knowledge that is presented in the Vedas in the form of Sankhya philosophy, it is directly relevant to the process of spiritual self-realization. And Srila Prabhupada is stating that by this Sankhya system of knowledge, one can immediately become free from this material concept of life. Now, I've just got one slide left. Right. So, whenever the Shastras speak about a living being, whether we are reading actual shlokas or whether we are studying Srila Prabhupada's purports, quite often we find descriptions of, for example, the various features of the spiritual individual. We also find, how the living being has been covered by these material elements that we've been hearing about today. We also find discussion on the various obstacles that the spiritual individual has to overcome on their journey towards self-realization and also towards God realization. So any information like this that we come across in Srila Prabhupada's books and purports, this refers to every single living being, like I was saying at the beginning, right? Regardless of which of the established 8,400,000 species of life they happen to be embodied within. So in terms of the spiritual individual being forced to come into the material atmosphere and being overcome by these elements, all living beings are pretty much in the same boat, so to speak. Right? We all become contaminated by the material energy through this agent that we call the material world. Right? So unless we purify our consciousness of contaminants, we will not be able to see ourselves clearly enough to understand what our predicament is in this material mess that we are in. Yes, we're actually in a material mess here at the moment. Now, Srila Prabhupada explains in a letter to his disciple Chaturbhuj, right, in 1973, this point of contamination, right? Because we know from the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita that the soul, the spiritual soul, cannot be affected by anything material. It cannot be burnt or withered or dried or so forth. So then how is it that the living being can become contaminated and conditioned? So Srila Prabhupada explains very clearly. He says, yes, the soul itself or himself cannot become affected by the material energy, but the consciousness that is emanating from the soul, that can, when that comes into contact with matter, that becomes contaminated, and then the living being is referred to as being conditioned. So, right, and you know, this sort of state of bewilderment then that ensues, this is called ahankara, right? This is the what actually constitutes the sense of false identity in the living being. And you know, from an individual's misconception about who they are and what they are, they then, you know, this leads to their misconceptions about what they should actually be doing and what they should not be doing while they're here. Right? So actually what we need is we need a detox. Right? You know, when we go to a juice bar, we might buy like a juice made of kale and spinach and spirulina, all these super cleansers, right? So these juices, they are intended to get rid of the toxins and the pollutants from our physical body. So similarly, we need to detox our consciousness. Right? We need to get rid of all the pollutants, all the contaminants, all this sort of guck that I'm actually going to buy some Drano today. I think, sorry, I just thought of that. You know, we really need to clear out things that get stuck in our consciousness. You know, it is actually said that through the ears, like we receive knowledge through the ears, and it travels through the ears, and then it settles in the heart. Yeah, so, you know, Chaito Darpana Marjanam. Yes, we need to clean our hearts, we need to clean our consciousness, and then, you know, we will be able to be alleviated from this fourth element that Lord Kapila is speaking about, this element of contaminated consciousness, and we will be able to see ourselves more clearly. We will see our dear Krishna more clearly, and we will understand our relationship with Krishna more clearly, more dearly, and we will also be able to understand each other more clearly. And from that we will understand our relationships with each other also more clearly. So that was all that I had prepared for today. So yeah, we've got about 7 minutes if anyone wants to add anything or have a question, have a complaint. Ram Prashad Prabhu, yes. Oh yeah, sorry.
The intelligent design people often use the example of Mount Rushmore in America.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
I don't know if the other devotees know. In America, there's this place called Mount Rushmore where somebody has carved these giant sort of portraits of 3 or 4 presidents in a cliff. So there's these huge carvings of the American presidents. So if I said to you, that actually just came about by erosion. So, you know what I mean? It's just an accident that it happens to look like 4 American presidents. So I think most people would say, well, can't accept that. There's too much, someone's created this. So they use that example that if I tried to convince you, it's just an example of erosion, no one would accept that.
Yeah.
That we've got portraits. So they use the same argument then. If we see things that are just superbly designed with so much intelligence built into it, how can that have come about by accident?
Exactly, yeah.
And as you were saying, even in the body, there are systems that, like the lungs, for example, we breathe air, except air doesn't want to dissolve in blood. Oxygen doesn't want to dissolve in the blood system. So the blood has to have iron in it so that the oxygen... So then you need another system, which comes from the liver.
Yeah.
It produces this stuff called hemoglobin just to absorb the oxygen.
Yes.
So you've got to have all these systems in place simultaneously, not one after another.
Yeah.
Your
Thank
example
you.
of the mousetrap.
Thank you so much, yeah. So they are two very, very good points, yeah. And that last thing that you were saying, that, in order to get this part to work, it's not going to work without this other part. So that is irreducible complexity. And I think that there is so much evidence for this. I mean, discussions are going on within certain scientific circles, but sadly, the young people of today, they will not hear these alternative explanations when they attend a classroom. It hasn't been able to move these very rigid.
Actually, I heard a lot of young scientists, like graduates or just potential graduates. I heard a figure of maybe 40% of them are open to the idea of intelligent design.
That's very, very good. Yeah, it's very good.
It's coming.
It could very well be a generational thing. That say in another 50 years, we could have more open-minded science classrooms, both within public schools and also within universities. And what we also are finding is that within the academic, what we call peer-reviewed publications. So the whole scientific community today, it rests on what is called peer-reviewed publications. That means that all of these science journals around the world, that is where all of the knowledge, all the results of research experiments is deposited in the form of articles. So peer review means that you cannot get anything published in science unless you have 2, 3 or 4 other scientists anywhere globally look at your work and agree on it. Right, so this is the problem, is that it's like a network of scientists who all want to keep their jobs. So, none of them are really prepared to, paint outside the dotted lines, so to speak. Yeah, but yes, so hopefully, we will see a change of that in the future. I was going to make another point. I can't quite remember what it is. I was going to say that we are today seeing more peer-reviewed journal articles being published on Vedic sciences, but it's incremental. It's very, very slow. Like there are some publications on the Triguna within the psychology journals, and but generally, you'll find them. You won't find them within the most, the topmost journals like Nature and Science, which today, have for a long time, they've been like at the top of all the research journals, and they will not allow that type of conjecturing. Yeah, they will not allow that. Yeah. So did you all hear and understand Ramprasad Prabhu's example of the Mount Rushmore situation? I'll tell you that there's another good one that I heard from a devotee. It's along the similar lines. Like back in the good old days when they had the printing shops, before we had computers, if you walked into a printing shop, all the you would be printing according to like actual little metal objects that had all the different letters on them, like A, B, C, D, E, and they were all arranged, according to what was in the document, and then they would print them off. So somebody said, well, the possibility of life eventuating out of something like a little cell, blob-like cell floating around in mud, with some chemicals, is the same as if you had a bomb go off inside a printing shop and then all of a sudden you got an Oxford English dictionary from that bomb going off. Yeah. So, and it is like that. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Same with Mount Rushmore. You are not going to get those features by random selection, as they call it, chaotic random selection of chemicals. So, actually, just to sum up, there is so much evidence today, we could call it scientific evidence, that really refutes and really denies the concept of evolution, that it is just building and building and building. But still today, if you open up any biology book, standard biology book within the universities, or a standard, say, chemistry or a physics textbook, you will find, what you will find in there is the evolutionary, what has become known as the evolutionary perspective. Even in psychology, you have evolutionary psychology. So it is still not budging at this particular point in time. And it's sad because lots of people are being influenced. Yeah. Sorry, did anyone else have a quick comment? I mean, we're just on 8:30. Krishna Kirtan Prabhu, did you want to add anything, or? Beyond your what? He wants the microphone. Yeah.
Do you keep up with the latest work from the BI at all? It's be interesting to see what they're up to, because they've been going for decades.
Yeah, you mean the one in Alachua?
The Bhaktivinoda Institute,
there could be many branches of the Bhaktivinoda Institute. The one that's been coming up for a few years in Alachua, maybe I'll just talk to you about that after the class. Yeah. Okay, thank you everyone for listening. Jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.